David Brewster here with another episode of Chordplay, and this is Stevie Ray Vaughan's Happy Endings. And obviously the title is kind of a joke, but there is some serious chord work that we're going to look at here. And, obviously Stevie Ray Vaughan's a legendary, late guitarist, tragically died back in 1990. And, when I was younger and I was in high school, I was familiar with his name. I mean, he popped up, in guitar magazines all the time. But I was lost in rock and roll land. I was very much into, Van Halen and Steve Vai and Satriani and Malmsteen and people like that. And I wasn't really listening to blues, I wasn't really even listening to like blues rock that much. I was listening to, hard rock and metal and shred guitar. But something about his music caught my ear, even though I was lost in, flying seas of arpeggios. I still, kind of caught his music and I was like, what is that? And I bought Texas Flood, I think I even had it on cassette. And I listened to it and I liked it, but I was still just a punk rock and roll kid, And it really wasn't until I was in Atlanta at AIM, and I was in college. And I remember there were some people at school talking about, the Live at El Macambo, Stevie Ray Vaughan, home video. And I think my roommate and I went to Blockbuster when Blockbuster was still around, and we rented it. And we took it home that night, and we put it on, and we watched it. And I remember it was one of those defining kind of mind-altering or life-altering, moments where we put it on, and it was like lightning struck me, watching that video. I didn't really get it, just by hearing his music, but seeing that video, seeing him intensely play live, and the aggression and the conviction and his, just relentless attack, it blew my mind. I'd never really seen a guitar played quite like that, where he wasn't shredding, like Yngwie or something, but he was doing this very intense, very physical, almost violent, blues guitar approach, and it blew my mind. I was already kind of a fan or kind of a, casual fan or admirer. And then at that moment when I saw Live at El Macambo, I was blown away. I was like, oh my gosh, why did I not, pick up on this before, right now? And then from that moment on, I've always been a fan. Stevie Ray Vaughan really was just a walking encyclopedia of blues. He really did kind of compile and combine all these great, chord progressions and riffs and licks and turnarounds and fills and all this stuff. And he sprinkled it, throughout his music. And, one minute it sounded like Albert King, the next minute it sounded like Hendrix, then he was playing like a B.B. King lick, and then Freddie King, maybe a Lonnie Mack lick or something. He was all over the place at once. And that made his music really exciting because, when you first hear a Stevie Ray Vaughan song, you don't really know what he's going to do. Obviously, after you listen to his music for years or decades, the surprises are minimized. But to a new listener, or, maybe some songs or live, performances that you haven't heard before, it is an exciting artist to listen to because, your ear is just constantly treated with all these, interesting licks and sounds and tonalities. So this lesson is going to look at some of his endings, the happy endings. And like I said earlier, that's just a joke, that I just thought it was kind of a funny, title. But really, if you look at Stevie Ray Vaughan's music, historically, some songs he would end with just, like maybe the low E string, just kind of letting that ring. Every once in a while, there would be a fade. Sometimes he would end songs with, kind of standard turnarounds and things like that. But if you go through his music, over the albums and releases that he put out, every once in a while there's an ending, and you'll hear this sparkly, glimmery chord at the end, where it's usually higher, somewhere on the fretboard. And it always caught my ear, where it was like this special little treat at the end of his songs. Sometimes, not all the time, but he sprinkled these kind of interesting endings all over the place. Okay, so as far as like his standard endings, like I mentioned a minute ago, sometimes he'll just hit like the low E string open, on that final hit of a song. And that's not really what I'm talking about. I mean, that's interesting, but that's not really, a happy ending, I guess is how I'm going to call it. So if you look at a song like look at Little Sister, there he's actually doing a very common thing that he did a lot, where he's ending on ninth chords. So he's gonna, the song's basically an E, and we're tuned down, a half step in this lesson. So that'd technically be an E flat, pitch wise. But with the tuning or whatever, we're thinking of that as E. But you can hear him basically hit, an F sharp 9, an F9, and then an E9. So he's just doing this 3-tag hit. And the interesting thing there is he's hitting the strings. He was a very aggressive guitarist. And, a lot of people talk about, the fact that he used, large gauge strings on his guitar. And there was a period during his career where he used 13s. But he only used 13s for a small period. And he fluctuated all the time. 11s, 12s, 13s, and back to 12s, and back to 11s. But you really didn't hear or catch him playing with 8s or 9s or, really thin strings, mainly because he picked so hard. He had a very intense sound, and a lot of it was that picking attack. He was brutal, hitting those strings. And he also dug in, with his fret hand. So when you hear that biting intensity, it's a combination of picking really hard and then fretting and manhandling, the strings really hard. And, most, like shred guitarists and technical guitarists out there, your Vais and Satrianis and some of those players, they use a really light touch, a light touch with legato, and they speeding around, on the fretboard. So that requires kind of a smooth, light approach. And then when you hear Stevie Ray Vaughan, it's like a grenade went off. It's like this brutal, loud, accented sound. And you can hear a little bit of that right there with just that simple ending. If I played that kind of lightly, it doesn't really pop. You know what I mean? Like you're really banging out those chords. And one chord type that Stevie Ray Vaughan definitely seemed very fond of, especially for some of these happy ending moments, are 6/9 chords. And you can find this in a bunch of his songs. So we're going to target a few, endings here. But, check out a song like Honeybee. Honeybee kind of ends with a turnaround, and then you'll hear this kind of chord tag at the end with an E6/9. So if you're familiar with ninth chords, if you're not familiar, you can actually check out the Finding Funk Chords episode of Chordplay and learn a little bit about, some ninth chords. But like an E9 would look and sound something like that. 7th fret on the A, 6th fret on the D, and then barring straight across there on the 7th fret on the G, B, and high E. So that's an E9. And the 9th is right there, that F sharp. Now an E6/9 basically is going to relocate this D to a C sharp, which that's the 6th in the key of E. And it's going to feel like a ninth chord, but it's a little different because now you've got the 6th fret on the D and the 6th fret on the G. So it's a slight alteration from that 9th. And he loved using that chord, and he would save it, for these endings. So when you hear Honeybee, you've got this, it's an E, but you've got this little piece of like a B7, and then he does this open string, kind of Stevie Ray, blues lick. And then right there, he does an F6/9 to an E6/9. And that very signature, kind of half step, ending, where it's a half step higher and then it resolves to the root, which is E. He did that a lot, Right. Don't forget to, hit those chords too. Now another tune like Dirty Pool, right? That's more like kind of in D, and he's doing kind of a signature, tag lick. And then you'll hear this. And there he's doing it really high, but that would basically function as a D6/9 way up there. But you can see we're way up on the 16th and 17th fret there on the D, G, B, and high E string. So he kind of came out of the box in that little turnaround leg. And then that kind of thing. You can even catch that chord at the end of Love Struck Baby. And you'll just kind of hear that, it's an A6/9 right there. So it's like he kind of, was mimicking, or not mimicking, but targeting the E, and then resolves, to that A6/9 right there. Okay, for another taste of this kind of 6/9, happy ending action, check out the song Chitlins Con Carne, which is kind of a mellow, kind of slower, jazzy blues kind of thing. But he's doing this really cool kind of sequence before he finally targets, his ending chord. So right there, he's actually targeting. It's technically a C7 sharp 9, so it's like the Hendrix chord, but played in a very unusual way. Most people are thinking more the traditional Hendrix shape, but this, it kind of feels like a, like the E9 that we were playing with a second ago, or when I was mentioning the 6/9 chords, but we're on, the wrong set of strings. We're, starting on the low E string there. So bar, hit the 8th fret and the 7th fret there on the low E and A, and then bar that D, G, and B string on the 8th fret right there. And you're basically playing, that chord. Now, as soon as he does that, then he basically adds the 9th up here, that D note. And then he moves way up and plays a C minor 6/9. So there you got the 13th fret on the D, the 14th on the G, and then the 15th on the B and the high E. And you've got this really nice kind of upper register chord. The last example here comes from the song Riviera Paradise, which is another kind of jazzy, really interesting and unique, song in Stevie Ray Vaughan's career. And he did release, songs like Lenny. I mentioned Chitlins Con Carne earlier, and now we're talking about Riviera Paradise. So he's known primarily as a blues, legend and blues guitarist. But he did great versions of Hendrix songs. He loved Hendrix. He also loved Albert King a lot. So aside from those influences and sounds, Stevie Ray Vaughan also had this jazzy thing. There he's just melodically playing around with that F major 7. And then it moves to a G6. So there's an interesting little sequence of chords there. The F major 7, the G6, kind of walking that down a half step to go to the G minor. And then that major 7 flat 5 action there between E flat, that little piece of a diminished, and then ending with that really dreary, E minor add 9 chord. This look at these interesting, kind of ending chords, and the final chords you'll hear in some of these Stevie Ray Vaughan songs. And I highly recommend, go through some of his other, recordings and songs and albums, and just listen, to some of those really cool, textures and chords and voicings that Stevie Ray Vaughan kind of, held on to, and he would just throw these ideas out sometimes in the beginning, but usually he'd save, some of those special chords for the end. But leave me some feedback and some comments, and please subscribe to Late Night Lessons, and I'll be back with some more content before you know it. Thank you.